There is an entire list of what are called the most famous books of all time. However, we have time for three. Let's go. Howdy, everybody. My name is Rob. This is my mom, Karen. You are watching Books, Banter, and Beyond, the show all about those three things. Today's video is a very small smidge of what is probably a list of thousands of books in the world, but we all have things to do here. So we're going to limit it to three. And I made it even easier on ourselves to pick classic books because, I know enough about them. We'll go there. But, what does make a book famous? From what I was researching, at least via the internet, it seems to be the amount of books sold, the amount of, titles maybe written by an author, and just the general consensus of likeness for it.
So like
Which is
like reviews, would that count into it?
reviews, general, popularity, I guess.
Okay.
Which is no surprise that the books we picked are one of the biggest categories out there of classic literature. But the funny thing about it, I didn't think about this till after I wrote this all down. They all kind of blend an idea of what it means to be a person in life. So that's kind of a funny coincidence there. So today we have three books that you all probably have read. First off, Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and lastly, 1984 by George Orwell. So again, I know you've heard of these. I think you've read a few. I've read a few for school, I remember. But it is funny how classic literature is popular, but a lot of classic literature does cover what it means to be excuse me, a human being in the world, whether it's the rules of life, whether it's the learning what it is to be as you grow. So we're going to jump in and talk about how each of these kind of got their spot in most famous. So first off, Don Quixote. Story about the guy who basically learns that what you want is kind of different than what you get, but reality does blend with your choices and your wants. If you strive to do what you work for, you can get it mostly. It's a book that blends a lot of humor and tragedy.
Mhm.
It's kind of a funny book here. It's a book that you wouldn't expect to be so popular because it's got some kind of downsides. It's got some weird whatever. For me, I think it's just the matter of a classic novel written like a modern day book. Does that not make
Right,
sense?
and it's action. There's a lot of action in it, so I think
Yes.
it's entertaining. It holds your attention, whether it's a tragedy or the humor. It just holds your attention.
It's got kind of like a adventure story to it,
Right,
like in a
right.
movie, but in a story that teaches you a valuable lesson. So it's kind of like the best of both scenarios.
Right. I mean, the Impossible Dream song comes from this story,
Yes,
right?
and yeah, oh, it did become a play, correct?
Right, right. I mean, and Frank Sinatra sang it, but multiple people have sung this song, and it has become, I think, the anthem for people that want to and strive to do extraordinary things.
Perfectly said. I like that. Yeah, I mean, this book, and like you said, even just one aspect of the
Right,
entire story has become the
right,
goal of what it means
right,
to thrive, right?
right.
Moving on to the second one, Jane Austen, who we know has written many, many books, Pride and Prejudice being probably one of her biggest ones. They call it the cornerstone of romantic fiction that talks about sharp social commentary and enduring characters. Now, we've talked about the romantic or the historical fiction before.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people that are not fans because it's very romanticized. There's a lot of kind of old school rules that don't really apply to how you do things today. Obviously, back then,
Right,
wedding somebody, dating somebody was very different. So there's a lot of kind of weird things that you might get a little cringy because
right,
it's a different era. But when you
right,
look at what she was trying to write about, the differences between, the caste systems, the people, the ability for two people from, let's say, different areas to come together, it is an interesting
Right.
idea, right?
Yeah, and I think that when I think of I mean, I read it so long ago. To be honest, if you asked me to give you a summary, I couldn't. But what I do recall is that it is very much a period piece, and that
Yes.
it very much encompasses the period, the time period that the story, the book has been written in, and so you really are immersed. As I recall, you're immersed in this story. And
A lot of, I mean, even down to the clothes. There's a whole,
right,
the vintage style.
right.
There's a whole group of people, on Instagram that they make clothing like that, right? Because
Mhm.
it's popular in the sense of you want to go back to that like
Right,
period. So even not just even the storyline, but the physical parts, the food,
right.
even the castles, right? So you're right. There's a lot of romanticized. That's not just people to people, but I think also cultural, right? There's a lot of
Right. And I mean, and but so you have that, the all of that on one side, and of course, it is very much a statement on what was going on in society at that point, and it was, so
right.
you have both, and so I guess it depends on when you come. Do you remember what grade you had to read this in?
I want to say this was probably a high school book. I
Right.
don't think I would have read this prior to that. However, I don't remember, but I know for sure that I think the first time I was introduced to Jane Austen herself
Right.
was probably in maybe middle of high school,
Right.
so 10th grade ish.
So my guess
Um,
is this book was introduced at that point as something as a complementary, and I don't mean positive or negative, but complementary aspect of what you were also learning in history, or it could have been actually right.
yes.
And maybe, and because all curriculum is supposed to cross over, you're supposed to be learning about kind of like the full thing all at one time. It makes me want to go back and read it. I have the book sitting on my bookshelf, and
Oh, okay. All
and
right.
I've actually considered reading it. I think I might do that. It's a historical novel, and that I
Yeah,
think.
and I mean, generally, when you put it, when you think about the fact that it does cover a period of time, an actual period of time, it's an interesting idea. Yeah, there's a lot of things in there that's kind of like, okay, I don't need all of this detail, I don't whatever. But
Right,
generally, overall, if you appreciate, like you said, a period piece,
right,
Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, any of her stuff in general is a great way to
right.
engulf yourself in it, and you may even realize you didn't even know you wanted to until you start reading and you go, whoa, that's a lot of.
It makes you want to learn even more. I think about the period of time. You might actually, go and do some more research and see,
Yeah.
okay, how much of this is real, and how much of this was, simply commentary on that as well.
And that's a great way for the next one here, because this last book is everybody's favorite story about the happiness. No, so I'll get into the rant in a second, but lastly, we have George Orwell's 1984, which is basically the story of totalitarianism and the dangers of political manipulation, and it proves in today. So everybody remembers that Apple commercial where they used that scene from the book, and somebody comes in and throws the hammer at the screen, and everybody goes, "Oh, wait, I can think for myself." Um, it was a very good supplementary visual to what Orwell was saying. And Orwell, I don't know if I've talked about it with you before, but he was in politics. He studied politics. He wasn't a politician, but he studied politics, which for me, when the author actually studies what they're writing about, A plus. That proves that they're actually giving time to the study to write about what they're doing, even if they turn out to write a fiction, right?
Right. Do you remember when we were talking about how it seems like some authors of science fiction books, it's like they had
Yeah.
an eye into the future? Now, 1984 could also be considered a science fiction book at the same time of being a political commentary, right?
That,
And,
that
and I find myself saying the same thing is, oh my gosh, um, yeah, I mean, if you want to look at the parallels of what's going on in the world today, not just
right.
in the United States, and what 1984, it is a little chilling.
I mean, it's chilling, but then you kind of realize this guy amongst the other ones who wrote, they they knew better than maybe we do.
Right, right, right,
Um, and I think because of that fear that it brings, that's why it's so such
right.
a famous book, because it's not necessarily that you're happy about that idea, but the fact that you can remember it. And I mean, last time I read this was probably high school, maybe college. So it's been a while, but yet I can still distinctly remember aspects
Right.
and themes because of what he wrote.
Right. So what do you think makes all of these books timeless and universally appealing? I mean, there's a lot of books. You pick three. What do you think makes these?
So I think, generally all the books on the list, the most famous, are probably just there for popularity. But I think when it comes to classics like these here, I think it is the lesson learned from it. It may not be an obvious lesson. It may not be an interesting lesson. Obviously Pride and Prejudice is more of just the ability of, groups of people coming together. But then you have 1984. That's a whole another level of, okay, if we don't be careful,
Right.
bad stuff's going to hit the fan.
Right.
And
Right.
that, I think, is what keeps everybody, even if they don't want to read it, it still keeps them coming back to the
Right. Right.
story.
So, how do you think that the themes of these three books, or do they remain relevant in today's society?
I mean, I would say, again, it's always 1984, apparently. That one's probably the one that really stays relevant the most, because he's talking about the problems you're going to have when you give a set group of people almost complete power. That's probably the biggest one that stays true, because that's everywhere in the world, whether it's America, whether it's,
Right. Right.
Europe, whatever. Um, Stuff like Austen's Pride and Prejudice, stuff like Don Quixote, it may not necessarily full on be as important, but
Right.
I think it does have some truth of, for Quixote, for instance, standing up for what you want to do, sticking to it, don't not giving up. I know a lot of the self help books you read. That's their thing is, keep going, don't stop, keep doing. So I think it's a matter of they're important for being classics, but I think some might have more pull in society still than others.
Right. So, do you have any, I mean, do you have any other books that you think you would add to the list? You actually put those three there. I have a book that I would add to the list, and I do not know what that top 10, top 30, top 100 books are.
Right.
I would put Gone with the Wind. And the
Okay.
reason why I would put Gone with the Wind is, first of all, it covers Civil War. It covers slavery. It
Uh-huh.
covers relationships. It covers the changing landscape of wealth and what
Okay. Yeah.
happened during that time. Um, but again, under the criteria of what makes a book, it actually became a very good movie as well. It's one of the very few movies that I actually can say stayed pretty true to the book, and it was very, very, very good. So that would be a book that I think should be on the list. What about you?
Um, I mean, I would have a few. Obviously, 2001. I think it might be on there. Obviously, for the reasons of space age and all that stuff
Mhm,
of what we're trying to do now, going to Mars.
mhm.
Um, Books like Catcher in the Rye that we talked about once before,
Right,
kind of the coming of age. But one that I think might be weird to some is actually Dante's Inferno, which is a very old poem, but it talks about the problems of
mm,
the people in charge. And for those who haven't read it, every level of hell basically has people that shouldn't be there. If you don't want to get on the bad side, it has politicians, it has religious people, it has all of these people. But he did it on purpose because he was trying to make the point of these people may be good as an individual, but what they do in life ain't so hot for the
right,
time period. He actually got exiled for the book. That's how bad people hated him. He was literally banned from his own country because his book. But to this day, I actually have a copy behind me, right up here. This guy. Um, but that would be a book I'd put on there for the same reason that 1984 is on there.
right,
It's a good political explanation of what happens when a group of people have that. So there's a lot of books that I would put
right.
on. There's books that I put on just for fun, maybe some King just because of his writing. It's as I was going through the list of books, I really couldn't tell what the criteria was because there were so many different titles.
So we should throw it out to the audience. Hey guys, what book or books do you think should be on the top books in the world of all time. We'd love to hear, put it in the comments. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And if it's a book that we haven't heard of, or a book that we have and we haven't done a review, maybe we'll do a show all about it. This is the time that we make sure that you know you can go over to the next chapter, bookstore.shop. This is where books live, gently used books live. You can see that we have paperbacks and hardbound books on the left side. Take your phone out, scan the QR code. There's comic books. And then on the far right, merchandise, because everyone needs, a mug that says, Books
Of
Banter
course.
and Beyond. I almost said something else, the BB&B. I always get it. I had to stop myself.
I don't think
10
they're in
points.
business anymore, so it's okay.
Yeah.
No,
So
I'm
10
just kidding.
points to anybody that knew that what I was about to say with the same initials, BB&B. Just we'll leave it there. Uh, as always, Rob, it's always fun to do these. We look forward to hearing what you guys think as well, and we will see you next time on the next Books Banter and Beyond. Goodbye, everyone.